Hello, and welcome to the podcast of the Euramerican National Assembly. I am your host for today, Mr. R. With me, I have Mr. Black.
How's it going?
Don.
Hello.
And Ed.
Hi.
So today we're going to be talking about really meeting in person and how to do community building and what we've been doing. And there's a lot of talk about this. So just to give a quick introduction, if you're at all aware of trends in sort of the online pro-white kind of commentators, community, speakers and leaders, they're all talking about trying to meet in person. They're all trying to encourage people to get off the internet and get into real-life groups. And, you know, I think I've heard, well, probably everyone's heard plenty of explanation of why from these other people online. Just to quickly summarize it, it's really hard to censor people in person. If we're actually going to do something that's a real significant change, you need to have in-person communities. So, to take the next step from just complaining about stuff online, we need to have these in-person communities. It's also true that there's a lot of people that are on our side that really aren't on the internet or aren't on the internet much. So that's a significant reason to try to get in person. And finally, it just improves your own life. Your life gets significantly better when you have an actual friend group, people that you can rely on. And that's both in the short term, just right away after you've met some people, and longer term, obviously, we hope for more. So that's kind of the why, but what I haven't heard is people explaining how. And I think the reason for that is because they haven't done it yet, and we're all kind of figuring this out, or we're in the process of figuring this out. And that's what we've been working on ourselves, is doing that real life in-person community building. And so I wanted to have this discussion to talk about that, and we'll just kind of go through some of the different ways that you can make those connections and some pitfalls to watch out for, and kind of how we do it here. So I guess before we go into all that, I'll let people give some feedback. Anyone want to comment on my intro there and the larger topic?
No, I just think it's an important topic, and hopefully people will learn something useful.
All right, sounds good. So the first thing, almost all of us interacted with each other online before we met in person. There's a couple exceptions, there's a few exceptions, but mostly we have used kind of online meeting, and that's a good way to start. And so I want to talk about ways to meet online for real life. So, I've sort of thought through a number of different ways this happens. One of the first things that we've talked about already was the Way of the World, Nat Connect, and there's other kind of pro-white online communities that do allow for people to connect to each other in some way. And, there's also forums, and, some of our guys have met each other through playing games. So I want to talk about what those different ways are, and then really how to take those online relationships and move it into the real world. So, I guess I'll just kind of open it up, and we can talk about what our experience has been and what we think is good or not good about it.
One thing I would kind of say is, if you can find an existing real-world community that's already online, even if it's not directly a pro-white organization, but it's an organization where you think our kind of people are going to show up. For instance, I would bring up prepper communities, those kind of maybe European Historical Society type stuff, where they reenact that kind of stuff. Just go there and be around people. A lot of times people are afraid to bring out their inner feelings about a lot of things. But when they're around people that are like them, you can start to pick up on a few keywords here and there, or a key opinion about, well, does this guy like this or that? And, eventually what you can do is do like I did with Mr. R, where eventually it's like, well, would you like to do lunch sometime? And I'm going to have a friend come along if that's cool. And we did lunch and kind of talked. And the next thing you know, it's like, okay, yeah, we really are on the same wavelengths. It's not just we thought we might be able to talk about things. We started actually doing that discussion. But that came from a totally different group that had nothing to do with white not empowerment, but positivity. Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
So you can use that kind of thing. Right, it's almost a pre-made thing for you. You don't have to build your own group. You can go to another group and just start seeing if you can find those people.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That's one of the sort of things I wanted to hit on later was just how to identify groups that are likely to have our people in them for, just because they're the sort of things that we're interested in, that we want to do. And there's definitely tactics for identifying who those people are and aren't. You really don't want to just be putting out your all of your political and social views to the entire world all the time if you're have potential professional consequences or anything like that. So, and it just helps with being in these groups to kind of fly under the radar a little bit. So you have to come up with tactics to identify people. But I think, I don't know, I do think there's definitely still benefit to some of these online mechanisms for meeting each other. It's just, you're right that without that in-person connection, I mean, one of the problems with online is that you meet a ton of people, or there's just a ton of people that aren't anywhere near you, and so how do you fix that? Well, you end up just talking to tons and tons of people, and you happen to run into somebody that's in your area. So I guess, one thing, we've talked about Nat Connect before. I think that's a really good thing to have these sort of systems for putting people in contact who are already in the area. But I don't know. Let's see. Don, you've had some experience with some of the online type groups and trying to get people together. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, as you said before, it's pretty clear that most people don't know exactly what they're doing. Most people haven't put in the effort before to go out and find people in person. So everything just feels odd, and there isn't a lot of direction. But I will say that there's one other that I can think of right now, but Way of the World's Nat Connect is by far the superior method. Also, something that I see in the UK is, and you mentioned this before, Mr. Black, is that there's already an organization called Patriotic Alternative, and everybody knows something about this organization. Everybody in our circles knows about it, and all you have to do is go to their website, and then if there's not a local chapter, well, then you get in touch with the next level up, and you start your own local chapter. And I think that's far easier than running into people by chance. So something like Patriotic Alternative, you just go on the website and you get a list of all the different local groups that they have, and then you just join one. And
I mean, they're pretty
easy.
Well set up already, right?
Yeah,
so that's a good example of what we would like to be at some point.
They also have a very good reputation, and that makes it easy for local groups to have more power and to grow faster. Is that with a good reputation comes trust. And so if I'm looking to join Patriotic Alternative and I start investigating their work, well, I realized, they've never had a major scandal, and every single person that I see from this group seems to be a normal, responsible person. And you're just not going to have that same sort of accountability online, even if you get rid of the anonymity and you're talking to people in a personal way. There's stakes, still you're going to run into people that you might not want to associate with. The sorts of people who are, looking to gain something for themselves, but actually to not help our movement at all. So I think reputation is very important here, and also accessibility.
We've also talked about the weird phenomenon of, you'll start to interact with someone from the UK, and you realize that they're on our side, and you say, "Oh, are you in Patriotic Alternative? Have you gone?" No, they've never gone to an event, and you're like, "Why not?"
It seems so odd to us, because if we had a group like that, we would immediately be there, and that's what we're trying to do. But we had to do that because there was no group. So it seems odd that anyone would be in the UK and have our sorts of views, and they would be online talking a big game and not bothering to participate in an organization, which is clearly a benefit. At least it seems to me.
Well, I think in terms of transitioning online relationships to the real world, if they aren't one of these like Nat Connect, which is intended to get people into the real world, it's really just a numbers game. You have to just keep doing it. And that's also true with Nat Connect, because I don't know about you guys, but I've sent out a bunch of emails that never got a reply. You get, or I get like one reply and then nothing from there. So you just have to be consistent and stick with it, and understand that there's just tons of people that aren't going to do anything that are on the internet. And that, I think, as long as your effort level that you put in on this internet sort of connecting is low, as long as you're not, just spending all of your time on that, it's a perfectly fine thing to do. Just go into it with understanding that it's a numbers game, and it's a kind of a shotgun, and you're going to get a win every once in a while. So that's kind of what I would say about that. I think one thing I also wanted to note, there are certainly activism organizations online, and that will help you connect up with people in your area for specific activism. I'm not going to mention any of them specifically, but some of them, one of the things I've seen is that they tend to not encourage their members to really get to know each other, and there are reasons from a security standpoint for that. And so, I think that might be a reasonable way. It might be a good thing to do, but if you go into it saying, like, I'm going to meet all these people, make sure that the organization is okay with that, because otherwise they might not be happy with you.
As a side note, one thing I would say about those kind of organizations, that it almost sows fear within our community. We can't get in together in real life because this boogeyman might show up and harm us.
Yeah, there's definitely a limitation there. I think it's fine for those organizations to exist as long as there are also organizations that exist, and that those guys get involved in community building organizations too, because if they're just doing activism, they're never getting involved in community, then it's really isolating. Even if you feel like you're doing something, and there's a bunch of other masked dudes that show up and do some sort of activism, I would say I think that sounds like a very isolating experience. But so I guess be aware that activism organizations have their pros and cons, and you're also going to get a very specific slice of the population that participates. It's going to be young men, typically, that have some time on their hands, so they aren't, they don't have a career really started yet. It tends to be a very specific set of people. So I don't think it's a bad option, but there are some limitations there.
But there are a lot of different ways you can go about that. I mean, there are mechanisms like meetups. So you can just, set up and set a date and say we're going to meet at this location. And, I mean, I've got a lot of experience going back years. We always pick neutral locations, usually a restaurant, sometimes a place where there are a lot of people. We've met people at swap meets and, like I said, restaurants, and Irish or Scottish festivals, places like that. So the likelihood of it escalating into a problem, if they're not somebody who likes us, is minimized with that approach. The other thing is, pick safe places. We used to call it neutral ground. Don't invite people to your house the first time. If you don't know them, you don't know what they're about, they may not like what you're about. A neutral place allows you to meet them, talk, relax, find out about them, give them a chance to find out about you. And then if you like that, well, schedule another one. Say, hey, let's get together 2 weeks from now, or 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. Do it again. And then after you do that, maybe start inviting them to another type of event. Eventually, when you're sure, I like this person, I trust them, invite them over to your house if that's what you want to do. So there's slow stages you can go through. But again, start out neutral, safe places.
That's a good point. I think, especially with the online meeting, security is way more important. I think once you're actually meeting people in person, your concern level can go way down, honestly, because online it takes a lot less effort for someone with bad intentions to cause problems. But in terms of meeting online or meeting in person, meeting in real life, I think so. Ed, one thing you were suggesting there was basically existing pro-white groups. Or you were running some sort of pro-white group. You were involved in some sort of pro-white group, right? And so the basically going to something that already exists has obviously there's people that are going to be there that agree with you in some way, right?
Right. We eventually started putting on concerts and parties and things, having 100 or more people at somebody's house, big parties. And, once you've got good people you can trust, it's not a problem. But getting to that point is the hard part. And picking safe, neutral places, getting to know people, those are important first steps. And take your time. There's no reason to rush it.
Well, another thing I've noticed is that in existing pro-white groups, there can be a definite culture that already exists, and just be aware of that especially a group that's been around for a little while, they may have a way that they do things, they may be pretty set in their ways, and just respect that, don't butt heads with that, and be aware that it may be a limited set of people that participates in that sort of group too. So, there's, especially if it's like a religious organization, there is a culture and a belief system and identity that aren't just white, that go along with that. So I think that it's a good place to meet people, but be aware that existing pro-white groups are going to be a very limited set of people compared to the full number of people that we know are on our side that are out there that we want to meet and find. So actually, Mr. Black, you brought up before identifying places where people are likely, or our people are likely to be. So we've talked about prepper organizations, I think, are a good one. What are some other potential places to just go that make it more likely that you're going to cross paths with people that are on our side?
Well, I had mentioned different groups that might look into heritage for, say, the Scottish Society, the Irish Society, that kind of stuff. Groups that don't try and demonize our history, for one, is always a good place to start. Those are people who are already going to have at least some pride in their own people to begin with, and probably pride in Europeans and white people in general. So that's a good place to start. If you're going to an Antifa rally, you're probably not going to run into the right kind of people that we're looking for.
Good point.
Just their baseline is just not going to be where you want to be at. So kind of look at an organization that at the very least is neutral towards white people, and if it's something we like to do traditionally as a people, like preparing for the future, it's a normal European thing to do. It's why we were able to exist in the Great White North, and that's where we came out of. It's something that's inherited in us that So that's why most of the prepping community is going to be white.
Yeah, I agree with that. From what I've seen, it's like 100% white, even in a fairly diverse area. I was going to ask, what do we think about conservative or libertarian groups? These groups, obviously, there are people that are on our side that are there. I will say that there's a lot of existing baggage within conservative groups or conservatism in the United States that can be kind of hard to fight through, because you'll all the memes that we laugh about, Democrats are the real racists, right? That you'll hear all of it while you're there, and that is exactly the place where you find those people. So what do we think? Is it? I think it's worth it, but it requires extra caution.
I think it is worth it, mainly because you'll find a few isolated people who are already pro-white. They're looking for anything to glom onto, and if it can be, even if it's civnat politics, at least they're around people they can agree with on most things. I think most of them will realize these people aren't awake on the race issue. Every other group is, except for white people. Let's be clear about that. For whites, we have been indoctrinated and fed with this idea that if you love the Constitution and you love the flag, you can be just as American as the rest of us. No other group believes that except us. No other group thinks that, Nigerians don't think I could come to Nigeria, and if I love Nigeria enough, I could be Nigerian. That's just not something that's going to happen. It's the same with the Chinese, the same with just about every other place in the world. Unless you go to a European pronounced country, that's the only place in the world you'll go where they say, if you love us enough, you can be part of us.
I've literally never been in a group that was more emphatic about this whole anyone can be an American than in Republican circles. So that is one of my sort of reasons why I've been. Well, I'm actually not that involved with sort of the Republican Party, conservatism in general at this point, because it's really tough to meet people that don't have that just pounded into them.
I think that in the big picture there is benefit to being involved with something like a Republican group, but realize you're not one of them and they're not one of you. You can go in, you can drop literature on their tables, you can do all sorts of things, meet people occasionally. You might meet somebody good, although most of the time not. But the way the political system is set up, there's no choice. You're either a Democrat, Republican, or you're nothing. So, and for the most part, that means we're going to be involved in a Republican organization of some sort. And if you listen to professional politicians, they'll use this term caucus. And a caucus means kind of a special interest group within the party. And so ultimately, I think that's what we need to do, is we need to form Euramerican caucuses within the Republican Party.
Well, so let's talk about how we would, if you're being involved in these sort of places that are definitely not 100% people on our side, what are some tactics for identifying which people are good candidates, the type of person you should put time and effort into getting to know? I recommend if you have someone like that and you're at an event, try to figure out, invite them to lunch, invite them to to do something so you can have a one-on-one conversation, but you have to figure out who's likely and who's not first, because otherwise you're just going to be wasting your time with people that are never going to be on our side. So let's talk about some tactics there.
A good way I found is especially if politics comes up as an issue, I personally never push politics on first. Always wait for somebody else to do it. But you can drop a subtle hint, like I was watching a video by Way of the World the other day, and he said X, Y, and Z. And it could be very milquetoast what he said. But the people who are in our sphere know who some of the online YouTubers, Bitchute, Rumblers are that will kind of speak to our line of thinking, and they'll pick up on that pretty quickly. You don't have to say, oh, I'm a pro-white advocate, or I'm an advocate for white well-being, or anything like that. You just mention somebody who is in that sphere of influence. Mostly the people who hate them aren't going to bring it up anyway, and the people that hate them anyway aren't going to be in conservative circles to begin with. They're going to be in your Antifa circles, those kind of things. Your CivNats aren't going to know who some of our more milquetoast pro-white people are. So as soon as you bring up a few of them, if somebody around you is in agreement, they'll glob onto you right away anyway and say, hey, I listened to that guy too, you know, and then you build it from there of, oh, well, would you like to go to lunch sometime and maybe we can discuss a little further, because you'll both know you're not in a open forum if you're at a group gathering already.
But I think it's worth pointing out so that there are at least two classes of people. There are people who have some identity and some idea that, you know, being white is an important part of who we are, and there are people who don't. So the messaging that has to be targeted towards them, obviously, yes. In your case, you were talking about, Mr. Black, you were talking about somebody who is already leaning in our direction,
right,
reaching and meeting them. But then, so that's one set of activities. And then people who are not even familiar with our message, well, that's a different set of activities and a different approach that you have to take to reach out to them. And a lot of times, again, I think probably dropping some literature or making literature available to them, or let them go home and understand the ideas or learn about our ideas, direct them to a video on YouTube or something like that. Those people, they've got to, this is one thing, our side, our group has its own culture, and many of those people, if you want to use a term, they're not encultured to our ways. They don't think like we do. You can't just throw everything that we are familiar with to them because it's completely foreign to them.
Yeah, one thing I would say is picking up on somebody who's hasn't quite arrived, shall we say?
Sure.
Is to just kind of mention, you know, it's weird how anti-white commercials have become now.
Right.
You know, just throw something as simple as that. Why do all the white men seem really dumb, but every time they have to have a smart person, it has to be somebody of color? That's just weird. It's almost like it's an anti-white society. You know, bring up something along those lines and see if they'll go with it. If they're what I would call a vague, just completely oblivious to what's happening in the world, they're not going to want to have that conversation at all. They're going to spin that conversation to anything and everything else. But people that might be just starting to wake up and be like, yeah, you know, I've noticed that too. They might not have ever read any of our literature, seen any of our videos, but you can tell they're starting to wake up to the fact that the world is not on their side as a white person.
Yeah.
I think that's a good one in terms of dropping hints or suggestions and seeing where they go with it. Like the critical race theory thing was a good one here, because you could say, like, yeah, I mean, it's just about hating white people, and people would from their reaction you could tell whether they were like, yes, and and I'm on your side, or yes, and that's so strange, isn't it? You know, if they're shocked by the fact that there's this anti-white movement, then that's a sign that they don't know what's up, right?
Yeah, they've got a lot further to go.
Yeah, they've got a ways to go. Also, just kind of dropping online names, sort of, and seeing what the reaction is. I think that's a good one too. Like whenever I hear someone, and I've had people kind of do this to me, and they're like, "Oh, do you know Steven Crowder?" I'm like, yeah, I'm familiar with Steven Crowder. I've watched some of his stuff. And then you say, like, you know, do you know Jared Taylor? And they're, oh, I've never heard of Jared Taylor. And you're like, oh, okay. So I do think that's a good tactic of just seeing how far they got down that internet pipeline, shall we say.
Yeah, you know, guys like Jared Taylor, he used to show up on CNBC and other news organizations in the 90s. It wasn't unusual for him and his group to be part of a normal, just political discussion. Even in Congress, they would show up. So, you know, somebody who is definitely more conservative on our side should definitely have heard of Jared Taylor, at least if they're an older person. Some of our younger guys would probably not know who he is, because he's been persona non grata since the 2000s, probably, at least in political circles.
Yeah, well, I think with sort of taking these tactics and using them, I do think that just at that point, it's really about just getting out and doing more stuff in person whenever you can, as much as possible. And that can be as simple as joining some other meetup group if you have a little bit of time that's not at all, you know, related to our sort of politics or our identity or our kind of our side. the more stuff you can do, you do actually get opportunities to feel people out. And if you're not comfortable with this sort of feeling people out and getting a sense of their beliefs in politics, I would just say just do it, right? It's a skill you develop. You get better at it over time, and that's one thing I kind of talk about later is just developing these skills. But this is a really important skill, and once you have it, you can do it all the time just to try to figure out who you're talking to and what they're about and where they are, and if they'd be a good person to join a local group.
Right, and a big part of it is let these things happen organically. Don't go there with the intent of, I'm going to talk to 10 people and bring up politics with them. No, I'm going to go to this thing. I'm going to enjoy what I'm doing. If somebody brings it up, I'll drop a few hints here and there. If they pick up on that string and we carry on, great. If they don't, I'm there to have fun anyway. I'm going to something I want to be at regardless. If you're making this a job and your job is to proselytize, white well-being to people, they're going to catch up. They're going to catch on to that very quickly, and you'll probably be cut off from whatever group by the people who don't want you there or don't want that kind of people, our kind of people there. If you're just blending in and you're having discussions and you're adding to that group as a group, you'll do great. And a lot of times, some of these things will take 3 and 4 contacts with people before they'll be willing to even interact with you on a real life basis of not just a yes, no kind of, really let you in to know who they are.
Yeah, I definitely agree that, especially early on, you don't want to be just really aggressive about trying to fit in your talking points or whatever into any conversation, because that's just it's gonna look weird and the person's gonna be turned off. But as you get more comfortable, the opportunities do come up really regularly, or you'll just get a sense that this is just not a person that I should bring anything up to at all because they're not gonna respond well. You'll get that sense, I think, pretty quickly after doing this for a little while.
Yeah, as with any skill, the more you do it, the better you'll get at it, and the better you'll be at reading people just right off the bat as to how they've taken what, even if it's something minor you said, you'll see micro reactions within them as you get better at it.
So I guess I want to move on to, let's talk about what is the community building that we're talking here, because what we're talking about is meeting people, and obviously the goal, your goal in meeting people in general, is to make friends. So we want to just get to know people on a personal level and start to get friendly with them. Like I said, go out to eat with them, do one-on-one things where you can talk to them, and then from there, I guess there's really some early activities that I think are make sense to just kind of start with. I think what we did was easy and worked pretty well. So let's kind of talk through some of the early things you can do, not just as, okay, we have a group of friends, but we're doing this as a group with the intention of forming a sort of pro-white, white identity, white culture type group. I guess let's talk through what we did early and what we thought worked and what didn't work, or what some of our lessons learned were.
I mean, again, the first is meet at safe places like restaurants or wherever. The next thing is, once you felt comfortable, you could start inviting them over. You can have barbecues at a house. If you don't feel comfortable inviting them to your house, you can have a barbecue at a park.
The park has actually worked really well for us because you can have large groups that aren't, and it's not in a situation where you're likely to have problems. And a lot of times people think, oh, we're out in the open, we could have people just randomly show up. That doesn't happen. That's unless you're in some. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Another good benefit of the park is if you have somebody who isn't sure of the group, they don't feel like they're trapped. Like if you're at somebody's house, once you're in their door, you feel like, well, I got to say goodbye and do all these things. Whereas, if they don't feel comfortable, they can just walk to their car and leave at a park. They're not constrained within your area. Like you said, Mr. Ed, it's a neutral area. This is nobody's and everybody's at the same time, so they can come and go if they please, and
It's really low pressure.
very low pressure. Yes.
Yeah, and it's easy. I mean, so you go to the store, you get some hamburgers, some buns and some ketchup and mayonnaise or whatever you like. You flop it on the table. You start up the barbecue if you're at a park. A lot of them have barbecues already, or you bring your own. You just you talk while you're cooking, or if you're not cooking and involved in that, then you're just sitting there talking, enjoying each other's company, talking about things that you like. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, then yeah, it's easy for somebody to say, "Had a great day. See you later."
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So I recommend those sort of meetups early on. I think that they're very good for just getting to know people that you don't know that well. And another thing we've learned is consistency is very important. So make sure that you're having an event, say, every month. And depending on where you are, that might be difficult to meet in a park, but figure it out. Figure something out where you can have some sort of low pressure event. A restaurant would be the next best thing, after a park, because people can feel pretty easy to come in and go if they get uncomfortable. So I think that sort of consistency for an event is good. But then also, once you have kind of a group that you have some comfort level with, we've done some other events. We've done some other get-togethers. I think the hiking group has been very successful so far. So what do we think about those sort of activities too? I think that's a good next level.
Yeah, the extra stuff beyond just the once a month, and I would say once a month is the maximum time I would go. Some people talk about quarterly, but I think once you're starting to get out into the 3-month time period, if a person misses one of those events, they'll never show up again.
Well, and I used to say someone you only meet once every 2 months is a stranger. You become very familiar with the people if you're meeting them on a regular basis. But if it's been months since you've met them, they're strangers again.
Exactly. Yeah. So once a month for the main group get together, that would be a minimum. But then, like you said, after that, you plan other activities in between. The hiking group that we do, it's great. You get out, you're just out in the woods, and you're going through a trial together. It's basically what they do in basic training. They take a group of people who don't know each other, and they put them through a lot of bad things or things that feel bad in the moment, but you get to know each other because you have to help each other to make it through. So that's why the hike is always good, because it's a trial for everyone involved. And then you guys, we also have a weightlifting group that get together. I don't know how often you guys do that.
Well, that's 3 times a week, and you definitely get to know each other pretty well when you're meeting that often. So if you can get to that point, and that's only going to be a small set of people that are going to be able to do that, but it is great. And I think that has made definite improvements in all of our lives.
And then the other thing you're doing is movie nights. So between our big group monthly activity, in the 2 weeks later, generally we'll do a movie night. And again, that's just a very comfortable setting where you can sit down with people you like and watch a show.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that we wouldn't do these things I certainly wouldn't do these things if I didn't enjoy them, and if I didn't feel like I was doing activities with my friends and not just being part of this mandatory thing. Oh, the chore that I have to do. I have to go to this stupid group every month. The sort of people that you should be meeting if you are somewhat selective about the people that you encounter and the people that you invite into your life, the sorts of people that you establish this group with, they should be people that you can be friends with.
Yeah, so I think there's also kind of different levels with this, because there are people that I don't invite to movie night. And I guess we'll kind of talk about that. So there are people that are perfectly reasonable to be members of your group that you don't actually like that much. You're not going to be friends with each other, and it doesn't have to be one big group of everyone's close. But what you want to develop over time is there should be different groups, every social group does this, where you kind of have groups of friends and then a larger community, and that's what you're trying to build. So there's going to be people that you aren't close with, and that's totally fine. However, there are people that are a problem, and we can talk about on another podcast how to deal with that, and how to identify when someone's not just a person that my personality doesn't work well with, but someone that's actually shouldn't be in the group, and how to identify them and how to kick them. But really, for people that are just not your greatest friend, they're going to be at your picnics. They're going to be at that sort of big group event, but I'm not going to have them necessarily over to my house. So I think that's a good point, though, too, is that we definitely have a group where we like each other, we're friends, and then we have a larger group too, where I don't know these people as well. I don't trust them as much. Maybe there's people that just for whatever reason personalities aren't well meshed, and I think it's important to realize that you do want to make friends here, but you don't need everyone to be your friend, nor do you need to be everyone's friend. So if you have someone who's kind of socially awkward or whatever, and they really want you to hang out with them, you can say no, and that's totally fine, and that shouldn't nuke the group. If people understand, if people are reasonable, socially adept people, they'll understand that they aren't going to be friends with literally everyone that they encounter in this group. So I think that's kind of a weird balance that you run into here, where you do want to be friendly with everyone, you do want to grow the group, but you don't need to be best friends with every single person.
And if there's problems, the solution is to start splitting the group up. Rather than always unifying into one big giant group, you can have lots of little subgroups. And if you think someone's a problem, especially if they're having a particular personality conflict with someone else, well, then just create 2 different events. And you can still, and if they continue to be a problem, well, they're a problem. Maybe you do need to get rid of them. But there are things you can do to manage. The bigger picture is a group can only grow so large anyways. You hear that with, especially like Christian churches. They say that as a church is growing up to the point of about 200, everybody feels like they're part of a community. But after a church grows beyond 200 people, it just becomes, they don't know anybody. There's limits in human ability to know people. Your closest friends are going to be, less than 10 people. And then your bigger community, well, it's going to be under 200 people. And beyond that, there's a lot of strangers. So what you want to do is try to have a group, a Euramerican pro-white group, which you enjoy being around with, that everybody enjoys being around with. So that's going to be, a handful of people for very close relationships. But it's great also and this is what the Euramerican National Assembly is advocating, is breaking into smaller groups and then maybe have quarterly larger events. So there could be several smaller groups across the city, and then we have a quarterly event, and then maybe, a county event once a year kind of thing. That's kind of where we want to head.
Yeah, I would say a big thing is you don't have to like everyone you work with, as long as you're all headed for the same goal, at least in the same direction. Maybe not even the same exact end goal, but we're all heading in the same direction. I was in the military. We ran into that all the time. You didn't have to like the guy next to you, but you and the guy next to you had a mission to get done, and you were going to get it done, whether you liked each other or not. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have fun. And like we've said here, you can have different groups within the main group, and that's okay. It's all right to do that. Matter of fact, it's preferable to do that because then everybody's happier. You don't feel like I have to go see this guy again type of thing. You definitely don't want people to run into that in any kind of situation, especially a social group like what we're building.
But you want to be. The one thing I would caution is you want to have something that you do have in common. And for us, that Euramerican Americans, it's a society based on our heritage.
Right. You have to have a common goal.
And that is enough for us to say we've all got something in common. We can break apart, do our own things, but when we come together, we know we're one people. So, that's the other thing that you got to be careful of. And there's an old saying, it's better to light a candle than curse the darkness. And that is, don't allow every session to become nothing but a complaint fest. You've got to turn it into something positive that you guys are all working towards. Building community, having a someplace safe if you've got children that you can, your children can meet with other people's children. That's something to work towards.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And one of the things I wanted to bring up here is that if you're hearing this and you're thinking to yourself, I don't have the social skills to do all these things. I haven't done all this before. I certainly haven't led it. I certainly haven't organized it. I'm not that guy. Well, neither was I. I don't think any of us were when we started. And you develop these skills. There's a lot of skills that you develop to be able to manage other people's emotions to a certain extent, and people are sensitive sometimes about things. There's a lot of stuff that we've touched on here that they are social skills that you probably don't have. And I'm not just talking to the younger guys that have grown up on video games. Also, people that are boomers, my parents' age, they've lost social skills over time. I've definitely seen this where, because of how culture has developed and atomized people over time, nobody has social skills. And you're going to have to deal with that in yourself, and you're going to have to accept that in other people to a certain extent, that you just expect it, that there's going to be awkwardness. And remember to just keep doing it, and you will get better at it. And I would have had no idea how to handle this sort of weird social interactions that you sometimes run into with this stuff. And then you do it, and you realize that you can handle it. And if you didn't do it that well the first time, you can the next. So I that's one thing I just want to say for anyone that doesn't feel like they have what it takes. You do. You just have to try and do it.
And another thing I would say is, as the group grows, leaders will show up organically. There will be people that say, I want to lead this. I want to do that. And that's great. One thing to keep in mind is you don't want the kind of people that want to play the villain. That's been a big part of the destruction of white groups in the past. Is there are people who want to play into our enemies' caricature of what we are. You don't want those. The people you want leading are the people that are high energy, they have a good outlook on life, and they have a clear picture of, I want things better. Not, I want to be the villain for somebody else's story. We need to be the heroes for our own story of, we're doing these great things to help move our people forward. Here's the vision. I want to do, and leaders will show up that say, I want to do my part for that. So don't think that you have to be the one guy doing all the things. Others will come.
There's a reason to get together, too. I mean, the old saying is, united we stand, divided we fall. We've fallen as a people because we are divided. And, I mean, some of us who are older can remember real communities in the United States, neighborhoods and such. I mean, there was a time when people really had meaningful, wholesome communities. They worked with each other. And a lot of time now we're purposely atomized. And if we're going to strengthen ourselves, we've got to come together as a people and, assert what it is that we want to see in the world. And it's going to happen through community.
Yeah, I think regardless of whether you think you have the skills to do this or not, we have to do this. I think it's a good point that what's happening to white people in America, to Euramerican, it's intentional, and it's a result of this atomization, and we have to fix it. If you're not if you think to yourself, oh, I can't fix this because I don't have social skills. Well, the reason why it's a problem is because you don't have social skills, and no one does, and you are atomized. It's all tied together, right? We have to fix these problems, and you have to do the work. I think that's another thing I wanted to say is, if you're hearing this and you think that white people, white lives matter, you think that that white culture should exist and white people have a right to exist, you have to take some action in person to try to meet other people and try to form community. And I think that is it's hard and it's daunting, especially early on, but you can definitely do it, and you don't have a choice. If you don't do anything, the outcome is going to be bad. Guaranteed the outcome is going to be bad if you don't make positive change.
I mean, we're seeing it in the news every day. The Marxists have infiltrated the schools. They're indoctrinating children. What's the solution? That we've got to come together and either get them out of the schools, or if we can't do that, to create our own schools. I mean, in a large city, there are possibly tens of thousands of people who agree and think just like you, but they're atomized too. They're not in contact with each other. If we come together, we can start doing these larger projects as a people.
So I guess let's talk about some of our early goals here, things that we haven't necessarily done yet, but as we're growing, what are kind of the next steps? We're getting together, we're having our cookouts, we're having our hikes, we're having our we have a lifting group and movie night, and what are some of our next steps that we're envisioning?
Well, you're listening to one of them right now, actually.
That's
getting a message out there to people.
Yeah, this podcast is one of our attempts at reaching out to new people, helping our community. I think the answer is, we have to keep growing and organizing ourselves. Again, doesn't have to be one giant hierarchical community in a given city. Maybe it's a bunch of different groups. So at first the answer is we keep doing what we're doing. We get together on a regular basis. We meet more people, more little groups form in our area. And then we start having, like I was saying, quarterly or annual events. And this is something I learned long ago, is that not everybody can make your event. So if 100 people and you throw an event, maybe only 10% of them can make it. People got jobs, they got lives, whatever. But you keep having events, then this time it's this mix of that 100, the next time it's that mix of the 100, and eventually if you have a large quarterly or annual event, you might actually see 75 of those 100 people involved. But over time, they're all involved at some point, in my experience.
So I think, events on a quarterly basis that are a little bit larger and that take more development to put together, it's harder work to organize them. That's definitely in the roadmap. We've talked about things like having a swap meet, or kind of just some way for people to exchange things that they've built or created or whatever, a way to kind of foreshadow a larger amount of economic integration of our community in the future. Just something to kind of get people in the mindset that we work with each other and we develop things. I think those are good early things you can do, even if your group is isn't more than 10 people or 15 people showing up at an event. You can start to think about that sort of thing happening.
Additionally, once you start going, you'll be in touch with people in other counties and other states. If you advertise an annual event 6 months in advance and people know, guess what? You'll have this event and someone from the next state over will show up at your event. You'll meet people all the time like that. What we used to do as we grew our group in the past is we'd actually go out and we'd rent a property. In some cases, we rented campgrounds. So we could have 200 people at a campground and we'd have a great big festival, or had a great old time. A bunch of people just listening to music and drinking and chatting around a campfire type thing. So that's somewhere that it could go. The other thing I like to see is, for want of a better term, county fairs. It's pretty common in our culture that we had county fairs. So we could have an annual kind of event, which is for want of a better, again, just a fair. And you'd have to think, well, what kind of events do you have? Well, yes, you might have vendors, but then, you should have some cultural events, some music events, some history, and try to appeal to a bunch of different interests that people have so that they want to come and they want to be part of the community there.
Well, I think we're actually almost out of time for today. We started a little bit late for this one. There's other topics that I'd really like to go over in the future, but I think that's a pretty good spot to wrap up. I wanted to take us through how you start meeting people, how you turn just people that you know into a group, into an organized group, and I think one thing I'll say is that our goal with the Euramerican National Assembly is that we would like to provide you with help for doing that. We'd like to help you organize your group together and also connect them to other groups. That's the mission. And then ultimately, their long term will be able to accomplish a lot more than we've been able to either as small groups or obviously as individuals. We're not getting anywhere on our own. So I think that covers it pretty well, and we will pick up this conversation in our next podcast. So thanks, everyone, for listening. And
Thank you.
Everyone, sign yourselves out if you like.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks very much.